After the game, seeing his wife and son in the lounge.
On August 1st, 2001, in Mankato, Minnesota, on day 2 of training camp, Pro Bowl tackle Korey Stringer vomits repeatedly and walks off the practice field. Trainers clear him to return. He collapses. Core temperature, 108.8 degrees. He dies the next morning.
We had a knock at our door. It was late in the middle of the night, and Mike Tice came in and said we lost him.
The NFL had policies for almost everything. There was no policy for this. The question isn't why Korey Stringer died. The question is why the NFL made sure no rule could have saved him. The people who knew Korey Stringer didn't lead with the Pro Bowl. They led with everything else. He grew up in Warren, Ohio, and the people around him remembered him differently than most, not just for what he did between the lines, but for who he was the moment practice ended. Hall of Fame guard Randall McDaniel said after their very first lunch together following the 1995 draft that his personality just shined through, always laughing and always making everyone in the room feel better the moment he walked in.
I've never seen him mad. I've never seen him argue with a player.
He once pulled over on his drive home from the Metrodome just to help a stranded fan change a tire. When his 2000 Pro Bowl check arrived, he signed his entire $15,000 to a youth football program in Warren without hesitating. That was Korey Stringer. The Vikings took him 24th overall in 1995, and he won the starting right tackle spot in week 2 of his rookie season and never gave it back. 100 starts over 6 years, including the playoffs. By 2000, he had earned a Pro Bowl selection, and everything heading into 2001 pointed toward his best season yet. At home, he had his wife Kelsey and a 3-year-old son named Cody. And that summer, an Esquire writer was finishing a profile on him, a piece they were going to call The Enlightened Man. Korey had a tattoo, 3 letters, FTW, that used to stand for something hard. But after Kelsey and Cody and everything football had given him, those same 3 letters now stood for Find the Way. He showed up in Mankato that August at 336 pounds, in the best shape of his career. Nobody walking onto that practice field that August morning had any reason to think it would be his last. But the league he was reporting to wasn't built for a man like that. NFL training camps in 2001 were designed around physical domination. Running players in full pads through August heat wasn't a side effect of the process. It was the process. A feature, not a bug. Coaches who went easy were seen as soft. Most player contracts weren't fully guaranteed, and in a league where every August session decided who made the roster, nobody was pulling themselves out of a drill. Former Vikings center Matt Burke recalled walking onto that Mankato field in crushing heat and having to remind himself out loud, "Look, you're not gonna die. Honestly, you're not gonna die. So come on, let's do this." That wasn't one man's experience. That was the culture of the entire league. The Vikings knew Stringer had struggled with the heat the day before. What did they do with that information? Before we get to August 1st, let's talk about what the NFL already knew. Because this is where it stops being a tragedy and starts being something the league has to answer for. Since the 1960s, sports medicine had been telling the football world the same thing. Heat kills, and the way you prevent it is by giving athletes time to adjust before pushing them into full workload in August pads. The NCAA heard it and acted on it by 1968, 33 years before Mankato. They already had a mandatory acclimation period in place. NFL teams had physicians on staff who belonged to the same professional organizations publishing that research. And yet every year that passed without a mandatory protocol was a deposit into an account nobody at the league wanted to acknowledge was open. But here's the number that should stop you cold. Between 1995 and 2001, 18 young football players never made it home from a practice field. Each one died the same way in August heat, in football pads, doing exactly what coaches told them to do. Every single death was documented and available to anyone at the NFL who cared to look. And it didn't stop there. In the same 10 days surrounding Stringer's collapse, 3 more players died the exact same way. University of Florida running back Ross Otan and 17-year-old lineman Travis Stowers, who vomited after his very first August practice near Indianapolis and never came back from it. It was sitting in plain sight. So, with 3 decades of research, NCAA protocols already running, and 18 deaths at other levels of the game, you'd expect the NFL to have something mandatory in place, right? Here's what the record actually shows. The people responsible for Stringer's care on that field had no formal written standard on exertional heat illness to follow until 2002, the year after he died. There was simply no protocol to violate.
And one day I was standing in my closet and I said to myself, well, someone has to do something. And before I could finish the word something, I realized that the somebody that needed to do something was me.
Former Commissioner Paul Tagliabue confirmed it himself years later. He said heat stroke was not on the radar screen of most teams at that time. Robert Smith, who had played alongside Stringer at Ohio State, said he had never once heard the term during his entire football career. Not until Stringer died from it. And that silence had a reason. The NFL was clearing over $5 billion annually. Most contracts weren't even guaranteed, and training camp was where franchises evaluated the money they were about to spend. Every mandatory rest day, every equipment restriction, every acclimatization period was a cost. And in a league where pushing players harder than everyone else was how rosters were built, that cost was never going to be paid voluntarily. There was a word for what was about to happen on August 1st, and it wasn't an accident. The only question that matters is who knew it was predictable and chose to do nothing. The first warning had already come the morning before, and the Vikings saw it. On July 30th, Stringer vomited during practice and left the field on a cart. Chris Carter still remembers the last real conversation he ever had with him, crossing the pavement together before the July 31st session, talking about how ready Korey felt for the season. That was the last time.
It's hot everywhere. That's why they call it the dog days of summer. You have to realize, too, that everything in life there is no explanation for.
Before practice on July 31st, trainers weighed him. He had regained the fluid weight from the day before, so they cleared him to return and told him to keep drinking. What they didn't account for was a heat index that climbed as high as 110 degrees that day. Stringer vomited again on the field, stepped off briefly to get his ankle taped, and came right back out. Then he slipped, hitting a blocking bag, fell onto his back with his arms over his head, and stayed there. If you've ever watched someone get waved off when they needed real help, you already know how this ends. Head trainer Charles Barta brought him to an air-conditioned trailer off the fields and told him to drink fluids. He later testified in his deposition that he didn't stay to watch whether Stringer drank anything. Inside, Fred Zamberletti, the Vikings coordinator of medical services, saw Stringer sitting upright on the exam table and concluded he wasn't in serious distress. Stringer moved to the floor, took a few sips of water, and started humming to himself, moving slightly to a beat. The assistant trainer brushed his arm and noted his skin felt cool and moist. And for a moment, it looked like he was going to pull through. He wasn't. And what happened next is the part nobody at the NFL wanted on the record. A trainer held a plastic bag over his mouth, believing he was hyperventilating, even though throwing an athlete in a cold water immersion tub was the intervention that carried a 100% survival rate when applied within 30 minutes. Nobody reached for an ice tub. The answer that could have saved his life was sitting right there, and it never made it to that trainer. An ambulance was called at noon. He arrived at the hospital at 12:30 p.m., 90 minutes after he stopped exercising. That was the first time his temperature had been taken since he left that field. It read 108.8 degrees. He was comatose. He died at 1:50 in the morning. Here's what makes that impossible to sit with. Former teammate Todd Stussy said it without hesitation. If you throw him in an ice tub, Korey is alive today. It's that simple, and it makes it so hard to think about. Kelsey didn't accept the tragic accident. She wanted to know what protocols existed. The answer was none that were mandatory, and that answer became her mission. She filed a $100 million wrongful death lawsuit against the Vikings in January 2002, fought it all the way to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and lost the court ruling 4-2, shielding the team under workers' compensation law. She settled separately with the team physician in May 2003, and she was just getting started. The NFL called Korey Stringer's death a tragedy. Kelsey Stringer had a different word for it. Here's where you'd expect the NFL to fix what broke. That's not what happened. Their first public move after Stringer died was banning ephedra. A bottle of ripped fuel had been found in his locker, and the league pointed straight at it until toxicological testing found no ephedra in his body, and expert witnesses confirmed it wasn't the cause of his death. The ban gave the NFL something to point to, because not one thing about how summer camp was structured or run changed. So Tagliabue ordered all 32 teams to review their training rules. Some coaches canceled afternoon sessions that summer. None of it was mandatory, and the following August, two-a-days started again right on schedule. The NFL didn't eliminate two-a-days until the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, a full decade after Stringer's death. And what filled that decade wasn't the league looking for answers. It was Kelsey Stringer carrying the answers to the league. She founded the Korey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut, brought the science directly to the NFL, and pushed until the league could no longer avoid what she was putting in front of them. The rule change didn't come from the NFL's conscience. It came from a widow who refused to stop. But here's the bigger truth. This is not a story about one training camp in Minnesota. 7 years before Mankato, Tagliabue had already formed the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, a league-funded body that spent years publicly calling CTE research voodoo, while the NFL's own retirement board was already paying out disability benefits to players permanently damaged by head trauma. Then came Bountygate, cash bounties placed on injuring opposing players. And the league came down hard the moment cameras were pointed at it. CTE, Bountygate, heat illness. Every single time, the NFL moved when it had no other choice. Not before. The Korey Stringer Institute now has 22 full-time staff, has changed heat illness law in 38 states, and has helped cut exertional heat stroke deaths in sports by 51% over the past decade. 3 out of 4 high schools in the country now have cold water immersion tubs on site. Kelsey described what finally moved the league. I think they saw, hey, this wasn't about fighting them. It was, hey, change this. You don't want this on your hands. Korey Stringer, who was 3 years old the morning his father died, said of his father's legacy, even though he's gone, it really shows the type of person he was that people still care about him. And Korey's brother Kevin said it plainly. Anytime there's a major change in how society does things, it's typically because somebody died. I guess Korey's death was my family's turn to pay that cost. So go back to the question from the very start. Why did the NFL make sure no rule could have saved him? Because that rule would have cost money and constrained coaches. The league weighed Korey Stringer's life against that cost. It made its choice. Then he died. Then it made the rule 10 years later. The Korey Stringer Institute exists because the NFL wouldn't build one. That's the box score on what the league decided a player's life was worth. A decade of one woman's work to force a change that 30 years of evidence had already demanded. If this video makes you think differently, hit that like button, comment on what you want us to cover next, and subscribe for more stories like this. You won't want to miss them.